Last week, I got into a rather intense back and forth with an old high school chum when it came to the Confederate flag and the removal. This guy, who's in the military, no names though, he's telling me how they were traitors and all this other stuff. This stuff has to go. And I'm trying to explain to him that, you know, at the end of the day, we're still one nation, and not really dunking on the South has been a part of the reason we've been able to remain one nation. And so that's where this gentleman right here, Roy Westcarver, comes into play. He released a TED Talk. Now, Mr. Westcarver is a Southern historian, and I want to, knock out really a lot of the misconceptions when it comes to both sides. And I feel as if, I'm from the North. I was born and raised in New Jersey. The North has always been like, it's always just like, yeah, it was about slavery. Like there's literally been no question about that when it comes to my upbringing. The Civil War was about slavery. But to see people who ultimately have benefited, because the gentleman that I speak of, he's not even from the United States. And, he's an immigrant himself, and he's done very well for himself. And without the Civil War, we don't get there, right? We don't get to where you can be as you are, live the rather comfortable life that you live. So what's the problem? It's like, that's not even your history, fam. It's definitely mine. And it's definitely Mr. Wisecarver's. So let's get into this.
Grade, I always liked to read, and I was in the school library, just looking for a book, and for whatever reason, I picked up a book about Abraham Lincoln. And I was immediately just so fascinated by the story. I was 9 years old. We didn't really have history class yet. This is the first I had ever heard of the Civil War, this terribly violent story about how this country ripped itself apart and put it back together.
But the funny thing is that when it comes to that history, it does have a lot to do with what you're told by friends and family and what your family instills in you. Because before I was in the fourth, I know that I knew what the Civil War was. Like, it'd been a part of, me and my father, my father would talk to me at a very young age about the history of this nation and how, there was a bit of like a lot of the friendships that I had, because I grew up in a very diverse community. A lot of the friendships that I had, my father would, say to me like, yo, there are a lot of people sacrificed for that. Can you dig it?
Now, when you're a young Civil War enthusiast in rural Arkansas, your elders make a point to, it's good that you like history, but they want to make sure you get the real history. Things like, the War of Northern Aggression, and it was about states' rights. Slavery had nothing to do with it. We were defending ourselves against a tyrannical federal government. Now,
here's the thing, guys. Context matters. Context matters more than anything else. And so if your family was a part of the Civil War, right, and they were in the South and they lost, don't you think they'd have to come up with some reasons like no, it was a good fight. like besides, the main one about the slavery, but hey, this is about states' rights and stuff like that. Like, by all technical means, they're not wrong. It was about states' rights, because the states themselves wanted to, keep slaves. So thusly, however you gotta when it comes to losses, right, you got to justify it. It's hard to recover from a loss and still, maintain some type of bravado or, pride. One of the reasons why everybody loves Vegeta and Dragon Ball Z. Let's keep going.
These dissertations, if we could call them that, were certainly interesting, but I was reading these books written by actual historians, and it wasn't jiving. So about a decade later, I walked right up the hill here into the Memorial Classroom building into a Civil War and Reconstruction class taught by Dr. Bill Shea. And on the first day of class, he says, let's get this out of the way right now. This was a war about slavery. And I thought, can it really be that simple? So this is the first time.
Here's the thing though, nothing's ever that simple, particularly when you're on the side that lost. Like there are other, in order to maintain and keep going, and this is why I really don't have a problem with the Confederate flag at all, is because, you know, and like if you're on the side that lost, you gotta, but you want to maintain some type of, you know, integrity and dignity for yourself and your family coming up, then you'll be like, look, it wasn't just them. It is a bit, actually, it was more complicated than that. It really wasn't, but it was more complicated than that. And so thusly, like I, for one, am fine with that. However you got to get through, whatever helps you get over your loss and, you know, maintain some type of, like, maintain your sanity, I'm more than happy to let you do. And really, the United States has been more than happy to let the South do that, because at the end of the day, you're still lost. So it is what it is. We're not going to sit here and dunk on you. But the problem is that, like, you know, shoot, that white guilt is an amazing thing, and they just sit here dunking on themselves.
As an aspiring young historian, I decided to do work in the manner of historians. I was going to consult what we call primary sources. Primary sources are sources that were created during the time you're asking questions about. So the first state to secede from the Union was South Carolina. Did they tell us why? Yeah, of course they did. This is from a document titled, this is a mouthful, The Declaration of the Immediate Causes Which Induce and Justify the Secession of South Carolina from the Federal Union. I feel like they could have shortened that a little. So it starts with a long discourse about the Constitution that's written in 19th century legalese, and it gets to the meat of the matter. The Constitution, in its fourth article, proves as follows. No person held to service or labor in one state, escaping into another, shall be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party on whom such service or labor may be due. This stipulation was so material to the compact that without it, the compact would not have been made. The greater number of contracting parties held slaves, etc., etc.
Once again, I'm from the North, so this wasn't ever kind of like, I understand where he comes from, right? He's like, yo, like, when you sit there and say the war of northern aggression and states' rights, they're not wrong, because they felt as if, hey, within the confines of this state here, no, black folks are not people. They are our property. We are above them. We are greater than them, without question. And it sucks. It does, which is part of the reason why that the secondary issues in it, such as the states' rights thing and whatnot, what have you, that's why it plays such a important role in you know, the coping mechanism of the southern states, at least from my opinion. So like what your uncles told you is not much different than what, you know, my father would tell me. And it's our history. It's our shared history. And the thing is that as a country, the way I've always interpreted it is that, you know, the North, we won. We're not going to be sour winners about this. Plus, there's this thing called conscription, where the government is not a draft. No. The government just says, yeah, you're in the army now, snatches you up and takes you. And that happened to a lot of people who fought in the Civil War on both sides. So like, this isn't this was like, ultimately, if we look at it from a we are one nation type vibe, this is brother against brother. And at the end of the day, regardless, if you do have siblings, regardless of your personal feelings about them, like, you still don't want no harm. You shouldn't want any harm to come about them, and whatever they have to do to cope or get by, You got to give them that space. And that's what the North has done with the South for all of these years. And when it comes to, people such as my friend from high school who comes in screaming, oh my goodness, yeah, they're traitors and they need to be destroyed and everything. I was like, bruh, you just got here. Chill, relax. Honestly, you should be grateful that this conflict took place, because without it, you're not here. Let's keep going.
The only states' right that South Carolina was concerned with was their constitutional right to own people. In fact, in that very same document, they explicitly criticized a number of northern states for passing what were called personal liberty laws to circumvent the Federal Fugitive Slave Act that passed in 1850. So one of South Carolina's reasons for leaving the Union was northern states exercising states' rights.
So technically they're right. And South Carolina is where my bloodline comes from. So, bruh, this isn't anything that escapes me by any stretch. But I also recognize that was that time. And here in 2020, where we're at, it's omelets to make eggs, right? You gotta break eggs to make omelets, right? Just saying.
Now, I wanted to go through every Confederate States secession documents, but they told me I couldn't talk that long. So I thought we would ask someone, who could speak for the Confederacy as a whole. Like a really high up government official, like a vice president. The vice president of the Confederacy was a man named Alexander Hamilton Stevens. He's the fellow up here that looks like a 12-year-old boy with some scars. Mr. Vice President, why? Why did you secede and write a new constitution and start a new country? Was the Constitution really necessary? Why? The new Constitution has put to rest forever all the agitating questions relating to our peculiar institution, African slavery, as it exists amongst us, the proper status of the Negro in our form of civilization. This was the immediate cause of the late rupture and present revolution.
Once again, I know, right? If you were unaware of this, then wow. But the deal is that that's how those states felt. And they lost. And because they lost, we all have benefited from it. I am just not of the idea or the mindset, even if because that's the thing, like your uncles and everything, it is what it is. If that's what your family rocks on, that's what your family rocks on. Whatever you gotta do, whatever gets you this bed at night. Instead of sitting there like wilding out, freaking out, or like, going and completely losing your shit, which many people have it took us so long, guys. It really did. It took us so long as a nation to really, get into a good groove. We got into that great groove and like back in the 80s, and I was a benefactor of it. And so, like, with that being the case, on my end, I'm not going to feel any shame in my family's history and my family's contributions to building this nation to what it is, as neither should you. At least that's the way I see it as a northerner.
You can't really make it more explicit than that, can you? Vice President Stevens, can you make it any more explicit? You can. Our new government is founded upon, its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rest upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition.
And they lost.
Now, this is not me giving you a historian's interpretation. I have literally showed you the historical evidence. But millions of Americans still idolize Confederate leaders, Confederate monuments, and yes, Confederate flags. And they rationalized it by claiming that the Confederate cause was something other than the protection of slavery. But you and I, we have just looked directly at the evidence created during the time. So we know, as my mentor Bill Shea would say, that is wrong, incorrect, and just plain not right.
Two things can be true at the same time. It really can. And because particularly when it comes to claiming your own history, you like the states thing, because of the way it would, you guys, the South tried to break off and make its own thing. You know, if anything, it's pretty fair. Like, hey, look, we genuinely don't believe this. So in order to, once again, cover the losses of getting your ass beat, like, look, we're gonna break this down, and it wasn't all about this, even though, yeah, it was mainly about that. But at the same time, we do what we have to do to go on, because once again, I'm grateful that they lost. I didn't want them to win. I'm glad that they lost, without question, because it's created really the greatest empire that the world's ever seen. It was a big part in creating the greatest empire the world's ever seen. And so and so to, like, you know, sit back with all of this revisionist history, particularly when we have such a long way to go right now, is, you know, it feels like spinning wheels in a lot of cases. Look, the Confederacy, the Confederate flag, my personal interactions with it has always been one where, you know, quite a bit of caution, but also understanding, because my father from the South, we've had these conversations. Look, it is what it is. That's what it was about. What are you going to do with what are you going to do with what all that, you know, created for you? That's always been the main question. And hopefully I'm doing a lot with it. I'm doing the best that I can with it. As should you. As should anyone, particularly here in the U.S. Because this country is like, to sit here and pretend like we are now there where we were then, even if there are all these parallels and similarities. I'm sorry. Just as someone who's lived from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, I can guarantee you, like, miles and leagues beyond, you know, having slave catchers and stuff like that, and to have, you know, immigrants who that wasn't your fight, that wasn't your cause, to come in and be like, oh yeah, well, you know, they're traitors to our nation. Like, bro, like, bruh, look, just shut up. because that's like, let's focus on the future. Let's focus on where we can go as opposed to where we've been, because the revisionist history is just, it's too much. It's so much to go through, and it's nothing but a distraction to lose sight of what could be. I believe we could have our rocket packs by now if people didn't sit there and just, like, if we didn't throw so much money into grievance studies and the like, well, at least as a nation, you know, basically paying for our own demise and creating gentlemen such as Roy here, who, look, man, I get that you want to kick it, and I'm glad that we that you had the TED talk. So whereas, yeah, people can those who are under any type of false, you know, notions that it was about slavery, you know, I get that. I completely do. But ultimately, that was then. And we've collectively, white, black, green, blue, purple, we as Americans have been getting butt stomped since. But as long as, you know, the focus is on, oh, white people bad because their families fought in the war and still rock a flag that, you know, many of them were conscripts and just were forced to fight it. Come on, guys. Like seriously, it's too deep. It's too deep of waters to go into without no reward. Nothing but more hate, nothing but more anger, nothing but more resentment. But, you know, what do I know? Anyways, guys, with that being said, we're going to bring this one to an end. All the internet stuff, if you like to toss it, like, dislike, go ahead, do that too. Nobody's scared of you. Sub if you enjoy my fantastic voice and we'll get videos like this every single day. Share, because sharing is caring. And YouTube and Bitchute and like aren't the biggest fans of your boy over here for very obvious reasons. Bang the bell for notifications and speak. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. This should be done. If you want to believe, hey, if that's what helps you sleep at night, to believe that, that the main thing was just states' rights, which there is an argument to be made because they wanted their right. They felt it was their right to own people. The North said, nah, North won. Boom, here we are. But you may feel differently. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Until the next one.